Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. What we have today is a wildcard video leading up to game week 11. And it's important to remember if you're wildcarding between now and the World Cup that you get another wildcard during the World Cup. So the fixtures for the teams that we've got today are the fixtures that finish before the World Cup starts. So I think if you're looking at certain teams and certain players, it's an important aspect to consider. So the first team we're going to target is Bournemouth. Now they're on a pretty good run of form. I'm not saying you're going to need lots of Bournemouth players in, but as cheap enablers to not only allow you to get more expensive players in, but also to cover for the blank in game week 12, I think they look pretty good. That Southampton game at home will allow you to bring those players in, and you're not too fussed if you have to put them on the bench for other game weeks because they're cheap enough to not really carry much value within your overall squad. Next up, we've got Crystal Palace, and I really like their defence. I think the games that they've got moving forward as well look pretty good. You could easily argue that they keep a clean sheet against teams like Wolves, Everton, Southampton, and Nottingham Forest. And it's not out of the realms of possibility that they do well against West Ham or Leicester as well, even though they are away from home. Next up, we've got Fulham. Now, when we're talking about teams to target, I'm not saying that you should get in three Fulham players. But just like Crystal Palace's defence, I do think Fulham's attack against the likes of Bournemouth, Villa, Everton, maybe even Leeds, someone like Mitrovic, if he's fully healthy, can really get a lot of points there. So he's more of a player to target than a team to target. He's still a good price for what he is, and I think he's definitely got upside leading up to the World Cup. You could always transfer him out as well for that Man City game if you don't like it with a free transfer that you'll get in your game week. Next, we've got Man City, and I know they've got a blank game week, but that's why we're looking at getting Bournemouth players in or Palace players in. These cheap players that you don't mind coming into your team. It's important that you get a balance because if you're wild carding now, you need to prepare for that. You don't want to be left with like 7, 8 players for that blank game week, and it's not really one that you want to use a free hit on either because there's only two teams without a fixture. That Liverpool away, it looks bad on the fixture ticker, but I do think that Liverpool aren't the same team that they were last season, and it's maybe not as much of a threat to your team's points if you've got Man City players in there. So, someone like Haaland, you would say they can score against anybody, and Liverpool are a sort of team that they can't really turn on the form that quickly. Form isn't something which just comes about all of a sudden. You don't just start playing well. You have to build it up over a few game weeks, and Man City are on such a roll. I don't really see, the problem with having Man City players through those 2 game weeks. Same with Arsenal. Now you have to be careful if you're getting a lot of Man City and Arsenal players combined in your squad. It might be the case that you get more Man City players in now, and then after that blank game week, you use your free transfers to get in a couple of Arsenal players for those 4 fixtures rounding off the first part of the season, or vice versa. If you get a lot of them in right now, you have to make sure that you've got cover on your bench, but there's a limit to how big your bench can be. If you've got 6 players from Man City and Arsenal combined, well, that's not going to help your bench when you've only got 4 players from your bench there. So it's important to plan some sort of strategy for this wild card. You've got like 2 game weeks immediately and then 4 afterwards when it comes to Man City and Arsenal. Teams to avoid, and the first team we're going to avoid is Man United. They're just too inconsistent. You don't really know which Man United are going to turn up. They're still figuring things out. Maybe after that Chelsea game, if you wanted to get in a Rashford or a Dallo, someone that you think is good value, then go for it. But even if that's the case, you're probably taking out, especially in an attack or midfield position, someone in your team that is already contributing because you're getting them in now and you're looking at the players that you're getting in now and looking at the next 6 game weeks and saying, yeah, that's someone that I want in my team for that length of time. Next team we've got is Newcastle, and I know they're playing well, but those fixtures don't look great. Someone like Trippier, I would maybe say is potential good value. And if you've got him in your team and you're not wild carding, I wouldn't be in a rush to transfer him out, but what we're looking at is when, players, FPL players are making wholesale changes to their team. So if that is you and you're looking to just revamp your whole team, that's when you could take Trippier out. I know he's very highly owned, but I look at those fixtures and I think, well, Man United, Spurs, and Chelsea, they're fixtures that I wouldn't expect Newcastle to keep a clean sheet in, no matter how inconsistent, those teams might be. So, and because they're kind of spread out across the game weeks, it makes it a bit awkward. If they were kind of at all three were at one end, then you could maybe make the case for Trippier to be there at some point in your team. Next, we've got Wolves, and I would just stay away from Wolves full stop. I think I read a statistic today that they've won only one in their last 16 Premier League games. And I think if they were playing League Two opposition, I would still be hesitant to get Wolves players in my team for Fantasy League because there's just nothing there. They're not scoring goals, they're not keeping clean sheets. Even with the fixtures, I don't think it matters. I think they're going to make a change in manager very soon, and that might change how we look at things. Next up, we've got Nottingham Forest, and I just don't see why you'd get Nottingham Forest players in on a wild card when you could get Bournemouth players in on a wild card. Bournemouth are in eighth position. They also have a better game week 12 fixture with Southampton at home compared to Brighton away for Forest, and they're looking a lot more solid than Forest are at the moment as well. But even those cheap players that we've talked about, like Henderson and Williams, a bit like Trippier, if you have them in and you're not wildcarding, there's maybe not as much of a rush to get 'em out of your team, but if you're making wholesale changes, I don't know why you'd choose them. Finally, we've got Chelsea. Now, Chelsea, whilst they're potentially a good team, still figuring things out with Graham Potter, and the fixtures are mixed, combined with the fact that today or this weekend, I think Reece James didn't start, Sterling didn't start, Aubameyang didn't start. So if you don't know which players are going to start, when there's other options like Arsenal, Man City, players that have higher potential and higher ceiling, I don't know why you'd opt for Chelsea players. Moving on to the team, and we're going to start in goal with Gaeta, and it actually works well in the defence as well because on this team I've gone for a double up from Crystal Palace. They've got good fixtures. We spoke about the teams they're playing, and I just think it doesn't really matter whether it's a double up or not. I think they have those good fixtures. They're worth getting in, and they're good value. We have Cancelo in the team as well, and this team we will talk about the Man City players in a second, but I think Cancelo is a low key underrated captaincy option for those game weeks where you think, right, Man City are definitely going to keep a clean sheet, like they did against Southampton this game week. I think, he's therefore guaranteed those 6 points. And if he is in those attacking positions like he seems to be, all it takes is one goal or one assist or just some bonus points. And you're easily looking at a 16 pointer from Cancelo with a captaincy. If you'd captained him this week, you'd be looking at 36 points, I think. Which obviously you'd captain Haaland first, but in a Haalandless fantasy league, I do think Cancelo offers a lot more value than at least quite a good number of midfielders, if not attackers. Rounding out the defence, we have Ben White, 4.5 million, I think, still playing for Arsenal, and we can negotiate this blank game week. But he provides great value. Got an assist a couple of game weeks ago as well, and Arsenal's fixtures leading up to the World Cup look pretty good. Moving into the midfield, and this is a pretty well-rounded midfield, if I do say so myself. We start off with talking about Diaz. Now, I know we mentioned Liverpool have that inconsistent form, but it's a bit different if you own Diaz compared to Salah, because that's the difference of about 4.5 million or something like that. So you've not got as much pressure on your team with that value tied up in one player. Diaz has good upside if he plays, and just like, the other midfielders at his value, you would say, I don't really mind if I have to bench one week or if one doesn't play because I've got enough cover elsewhere. They can come in and cover his points. We also have players like Zaha and Bowen, who you would say if their teams are going to score goals, they're likely to be involved. Foden's in great form at the moment, and I do think for someone like Man City, although he got taken off on the 58th minute this game week, so missed out on 2 more points that he could have got from a appearance point and a clean sheet point. He's clearly on good form, and I just think he is someone that's working really well with Haaland. So he's more likely to start because they're on a bit of a roll. Into the attack, and we've obviously got Haaland here, if not just for fear of, everyone else owning him and missing out on points. But he is someone that is going to score. He scored one goal this game week, and everyone will be disappointed that he only got one goal against Southampton. But it's still a goal, and he's going to score even against Liverpool. I think that's something that you can have a good chance with. Like Zaha and Bowen, Mitrovic and Tony, they're both players who, when the team score, they're usually involved. And Mitrovic, he's hopefully, going to be fully fit by that Bournemouth game. And Ivan Tony, he's on penalties, got one last game week against Newcastle, even though they lost 5-1. Tony still scored and gets those points. Now, onto the bench, and the bench is really important with this wildcard team. With the players that we've got, you can bring them in, and for game week 12, you'd still have 10 playing outfield, sorry, 10 playing players total. Um, I do think it's something that you don't want less than 10. You can always use a free transfer to swap somebody, but I do think wasting a free transfer to take someone out to get them in the next game week is maybe a little bit of a waste. The one that I maybe would talk about swapping out would be someone like Ben White. I think you're going to want the Man City players for the last 4 game weeks before the World Cup. So if you can get in, another cheap defender other than Ben White for that game week 12, you could then easily go with 11 players from there. So that's pretty good. Final tips here, we've got isolate the games. So when we talk about isolate games, you have, um, you know, 5 or 6 game weeks, or 6 game weeks up until the World Cup. Isolate those games, target those games, and you can just, what they say, dead end your teams into the World Cup. So you don't need to look past game week 16 for fixtures. Just target those fixtures, get as many points as you can. You get a free wild card after the World Cup, um, that you can then just reset and look at teams from there as well. And that kind of goes in line with the international break. That World Cup is coming up. I would maybe then monitor the World Cup and check players like Haaland who won't be there. They are definitely going to be players that you can put straight back in your team. Because when we get to after the World Cup, people will say, "Oh, they're travelling back. They played a lot. Did the team get far in the World Cup?" So it is something to monitor, that uncertainty for that second half of the season. So yeah, if you like the video, drop a like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We appreciate all the support. Let me know what you think about my wildcard team. I think it looks pretty good, to be honest, but I'm fully prepared if to take on different opinions if you've got them. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.